I'm going to show you how to glaze a cake. We're glazing a mousse cake. If you're glazing a baked cake, it's important that the surface is nice and smooth. With a baked cake, the glaze tends to absorb into the baked cake a little bit because it's porous and more open. With this mousse cake, ensure that it's frozen solid, and I just rub my fingers along that top edge so it's not too sharp, otherwise it can cut through the glaze and we can have the mousse exposed on those corners. So just rubbing along that edge. Only take the frozen mousse cake out when your glaze is ready to go. Glazes differ in temperature. Probably the lowest you would have it would be at 28 degrees Celsius, and the maximum temperature you would have it is at 35 degrees Celsius. The important thing is not to mix it too vigorously, so you don't want to incorporate any air bubbles. You can freeze the glaze, you can keep it in the fridge, and then when you reheat it, use a microwave or a double boiler and just really gently stir it until you reach the right temperature. So if you haven't got a thermometer, just make sure it's just warm when you're touching it. You're going to need a flat spatula or a large knife, a large flat knife when you're glazing the cake to remove the excess glaze to ensure when we tip the cake, if it goes sideways, that we don't get a dribble off the side. Now I've put plastic wrap underneath a cooling rack so that when the glaze runs off, we're going to catch it in the plastic wrap and we can scrape it back into the jug and we can reuse it and reheat it. If your glaze is a little bit thick at all, or if you see it and it seems to be a little bit thick, simply add a little bit of water, a teaspoon at a time, until you achieve a consistency that's going to be thin enough to give you a nice coating. If you're glazing multiple cakes, I recommend you scrape the glaze up and reheat it before glazing the second cake. So we're going to start by going around the outside, then in the center. So pour the glaze on. Then using a palette knife, we're just going to scrape it along the top on a slight angle. Don't wait too long before you scrape the top because the glaze has gelatin in it. It will start to set immediately on the frozen surface, and if you take too long to scrape, you'll be left with drip marks. So the next step is to wait until that stops dripping. So when we hold it up, we can see that it's still dripping a little bit. Once it stops dripping and the gelatin has started to set, we're going to actually pick the cake up, cut off those drips, and place it down on our display plate or a cake board. So that's stopped dripping now. I'm going to lift that up. And then we just cut off any excess drips. We're ready now to place that on our plate and ready for garnishing. Usually a frozen cake like this will take between 6 hours to 8 hours in the fridge to defrost. If you want to defrost it faster, you can actually leave it at room temperature.